For the longest time, I wanted to like be a dentist and go into that field. And in first year, I was dealing with like a lot of debilitating like symptoms and like constant pain. And I was like doing really bad in school, and I was like really hard on myself about it because like in high school, I was getting really good grades.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Pain Check. I'm super excited to have Maggie joining me today. Hi Maggie, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education and what you've been up to recently.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie. I'm 23 from Ontario, Canada. I just finished my Bachelor's of Science at Western University studying honor specialization in biology and a minor in psychology. And then in September, I'm going to be starting my master's in forensic science. I hope to be like a forensic biologist and potentially be involved with some research in the future. I was diagnosed with JIA when I was 15 and also fibromyalgia later on. Some of my hobbies include like reading, gardening, baking, really just learning anything new. I love learning new things. Right now, I'm learning Spanish and taking dance lessons, so just anything random. Volunteering is also like a really big part of my life, and I love helping my community. So I am right now I'm the director of global development here at Take a Pain Check, and also volunteer with like the Arthritis Society Canada and other organizations like Make a Wish Canada.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing all of that information. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're going to switch things up on today's podcast episode. So we'll start off talking about your diagnosis journey. How were you diagnosed, or when were you diagnosed, and what led you to see a healthcare provider?
Yeah, so around the age of 14, we started noticing like symptoms in my hands. So I had like grinding noises, I would say, in my like knuckles whenever I would move my fingers. And we're like, that's kind of not normal. So I brought it up to my mom, and it was kind of like one of those things that parents do. And they're like, oh, it's fine. We'll like keep an eye on it. And it's probably nothing. And then one day my mom was actually like holding my hand, and then she felt that noise or like that weird grinding feeling and decided to take me to the doctor and realize like that something might be wrong. So we started going to my family doctor, and he didn't really know what was wrong. He thought maybe it was like trigger finger or something like that. So he suggested I just take it easy and like stop playing my instrument, stop holding books, my phone, just like stop using my hands essentially, which was a little hard. But that didn't have any effect on it. So we decided to like try physiotherapy as well. And then my doctor decided to do a referral to like a hand and upper limb clinic to see if they could like find something because they specialize in those type of injuries. And then the physiotherapist was the one that suggested that I might have trigger finger in like every single one of my fingers, but I never had those like locking symptoms where that's like the signal of trigger finger. So like your finger locks when you like bend it, but I never had any symptoms like that. So we just tried some different treatments like acupuncture, massage, like ultrasound and hot wax, but nothing like ended up really helping. So we went to back to my family doctor, and because the physiotherapist had suggested trigger finger, we thought of looking at like the surgery to release those trigger fingers. So he actually referred me to a plastic surgeon, which ended up being because we thought it was trigger finger. They specialize in like tiny bones, and he said they would be good for like that kind of surgery. The plastic surgeon herself was also kind of confused on why I was seeing her, and she was actually the one that suggested that I had potentially had juvenile arthritis and that I should see a rheumatologist. And so then we took that back to my family doctor, and I got to see referred to see a rheumatologist, which took a couple of months. And then finally, that's when it led to the process of getting diagnosed and then going through all the x-rays, blood work, all the tests.
So, what was the timeline for all of this?
It was probably like a year and a half from like the beginning of starting that to getting like the diagnosis with the rheumatologist.
Wow, yeah, for me, I it only took me a month to get diagnosed, so I'm like super grateful, but I know that there's so many people that it takes so long to get a diagnosis, and it must have been really kind of frustrating going to a bunch of different specialists and just figuring it out all alone, especially like you and your family just going through that. Did you know anyone else that had the diagnosis before?
Not for the longest time, no. Like I had a cousin that was like not like more distantly related. We were related by blood, but he had arthritis in his knee. But I never had any other like family or friends that I knew of at that time, like initially diagnosis. So it
And,
was like more of it alone.
and what was your treatment journey like?
So for that, I like immediately started on methotrexate, I believe. Um, but part of the like treatment before I could start biologics, I had to make sure like all my vaccinations were up to date and like all of that. So I had to do like my TB test before I could start any biologics. And my TB test actually came back positive, which was a shock to us. And so we found out I had latent TB, which was surprising because I hadn't really traveled much or like been in places that I thought could be exposed. So I had to go through like 9 months of pill antibiotic treatments for that. I didn't have any like symptoms of TB, which was good. I wasn't contagious or anything. But I had to do like 6 months of treatment before I could even start biologics, which was a little frustrating because there's could be like potential progression at that time. Um, but then after that, I started on Humira. And then from Humira, I went to Enbrel. And then I've been on Remicade, which is an infusion, and then I've been on Taltz as well. And now I'm on Rinvoq, which is my current biologic, which is in a pill form, which is nice. So I don't have to do any needles, which is nice.
I am also on Rinvoq, but I'm trying to get off of it, so because it's not working. But yeah, I like the pill format. I think it's so much more convenient than getting an injection, and I kind of don't like injections at all, but I feel like I always tend to go back to it because for me at least the injections are more like they absorb more into my body or they're more effective, which is kind of unfortunate because I like pills better. But it just always happens that whenever I have pills, I have like this huge flare up, but I just prefer it. But yeah, I'm trying to switch to Orencia, which I've never been on before. So we'll see. Have you been on it?
No, I haven't been on that one, but yeah, the Rinvoq, I've been on like 6 months, and I think it's helping, but not like significant yet.
Yeah, I've been on it since I think October last year, and I'm trying to kind of wait till I have my new medication to then get off of it. But yeah, I'm in like a daily flare all day for the past like month, and I'm like, this is so bad because this exact feeling happened last year when no, not last year, sorry. Like 4 years ago when I was on methotrexate, but I switched to pills because I was like, I'm so tired of these methotrexate injections. And then I would have like daily flares where my whole like arm would hurt the whole day for like 3 weeks. And then I switched into injections and then it was perfectly fine. So I'm like, there's clearly something with the pills, but I just don't like injections. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, the impact that your arthritis has made. Tell me a little bit about the impact your arthritis has made in your daily life, relationships, or even your academics, and for the future, the impact it might make on your career.
Yeah, so for like daily life, I definitely have had to make some like big changes, even little changes like throughout the day to make it easier. Even just like listening to my body on a daily basis has become like part of my routine, and becoming more conscious of listening to my body. And when I'm in pain and or fatigued, and just I've become more adapted to my like daily challenges and creating tools and resources. And so I've become better at that. Um, but there is still things that I can't do or have to take it easy, like doing chores or housework and stuff like that. I have to break it up. Cooking meals is a lot harder and tiring. Um, for my relationships with like family and friends, I would say have definitely been a little different. Like my mom's been the biggest supporter for me. Um, there has been challenges with friends of like them not understanding or like making comments of them like they think they're being helpful or just being joking around and funny, but they like didn't realize that they were actually hurtful. And so it like can be hard with friends and especially being younger, like I didn't really fully understand what I was going through, so trying to explain it to someone else was like a little challenging. So it was like kind of understandable that they also didn't understand, but like being friends at like that younger age, it was hard having people not understand. So that definitely was a challenge. And then that impacted my school as well. Um, so like in high school, I probably had so many appointments every single week, like missing school. Socially, it was hard to like explain that to people too. And they're like, why are you missing so much school? Or just being a student in general is really hard with arthritis. Um, I've just finished my undergrad, so I did 5 years. I actually spread it out over my last 2 years because I decided I would have had to take like a full heavy course load, and I knew that would be really hard on myself. So and put like super stress on me and just make everything a lot worse. So I decided to like spread out my hard courses over 2 years instead of just cramming it into 1 year, which was honestly like the best decision for myself. And I got to take a lot of really fun elective courses that I like wouldn't have had the opportunity to otherwise. Um, I do think like my arthritis definitely not like directly impacted my career, but kind of like indirectly. For the longest time, I wanted to like be a dentist and go into that field. And in first year, I was dealing with like a lot of debilitating like symptoms and like constant pain. And I was like doing really bad in school, and I was like really hard on myself about it because like in high school, I was getting really good grades. So having that big difference, which is a normal thing that they always say, like your grades are going to drop when you go to university, but dealing with that on top of like all these symptoms and everything with arthritis was really, really hard. And so I decided to start looking at backup plans because I didn't think in that moment I was like really hard on myself, and I was like, oh, I'll never be able to get into dental school. Like I'm in first year, whatever. But it definitely got better after that. Thank goodness. My grades got better. I got everything sorted out. But I decided I didn't want to be a dentist anymore. So I like started finding backup plans, and that's when I like got really interested in forensic science, and that's when I decided to take that direction. I also remember having like small comments from like my adult rheumatologist saying like, "Oh, you'll never be able to be a dentist with like your hand and back pain." So I think like little things like that also might have impacted me like subconsciously, even though I said like, "Oh, I'm not gonna let my doctor say that," but I do think they had like some impact on me. But I'm happy with my like career choices now, and I've come to terms with like those things. So yeah.
That's really good. And that's so interesting because I feel like I never knew that you wanted to be a dentist. So I'm learning more. And it's unfortunate because you do have to use a lot of your hands and kind of the mobility and to be able to do those careers. And it's really hard, like living with arthritis, to be able to do that. So I'm glad that you were able to shift gears and change your pathway into something. I don't know, it's really cool. When I hear about it, I'm like, it's really interesting that you want to do like forensics and because I don't often hear people or meet people that are interested in that. So I'm like, this is like a field that I want to learn more about from you because it just seems so unique and necessary in a way as well. But I'm glad that you were able to kind of shift things around because I think a lot of people feel that they need to do this career or like they're very set in stone about that. But it's good that you were able to adapt and find some other passions that you are also interested about to be able to still do things that you enjoy. So that's really good. Um, and then a big part about being a patient in rheumatology or any sort of field is that you need to transition from pediatric to adult rheumatology care. And that's really, really big for a lot of people, regardless of what condition they live with, you have to transition if you are a pediatric patient, especially in Canada. I'd say they're also in the US, but globally it's a little bit different. But that is a really significant part of a patient's journey. So Can you walk me through what your transition from pediatric to adult rheumatology care looked like, and what supports did you use during this transition that were either helpful or things that didn't really go too well?
Yeah, so I was with my pediatric rheumatologist. I was in a community clinic, so not like hospital based or anything special like that. And then when I did my transition, I also transitioned to an adult rheumatologist at another community clinic. I remember my pediatric rheumatologist kind of brought it up like, when you're 18, you're going to have to change doctors. Like, it's just part of the process. And so that's kind of just how it was brought up. And then there was like a mention of patient, like doctors that are usually referred from pediatric rheumatologists. So that's kind of the direction that we went. I don't remember having like this full in-depth conversation or like making sure I was prepared or anything. Like I do think my pediatric rheumatologist did a good kind of job like advocating for me and like helping me advocate for like accommodations and stuff like that. So she that was really helpful. And then I started my transition a little earlier. My birthday was in April, and then I think I had my first adult rheumatologist appointment in October. So I was fully transitioned essentially before I was even 18, which was a little challenging as well. And I would say transition for me has probably been like the hardest part of my arthritis journey that I've experienced. I experienced a lot of issues like right off the bat with my adult rheumatologist and just not feeling like listened to as a patient. I think like a huge part, I had heard like rumors from my that my pediatric rheumatologist had like misdiagnosed some patients. So I think my adult rheumatologist had like a preconceived bias or something that I would not have arthritis. So it was like a little confusing to have that. So the doctor like became my adult rheumatologist essentially became insistent that I didn't have arthritis. They took me off all of my medications immediately and all of my symptoms became a lot worse. And I just felt really frustrated as a patient because I didn't feel like I was being listened to. So I would like tell my doctor all these symptoms and just didn't feel listened to. And I was treated very clinical, in my opinion. And they just like wanted to look at that blood work and like scientifically see if that's what was going on. I think that like I never really had my blood work show significantly like inflammation markers, but they would go down when I was on these certain medications. So it was a little frustrating knowing that they were doing something and that I felt that they were doing something. So it was a little struggling. So after a few months, essentially my doctor eventually decided to try a biologic, a different one, to see if it would help. And then that didn't do anything. That one was an injection, and that one didn't help significantly, similar to like my other biologics that I had been on. They did small changes, but nothing significant. Um, so then after this, I hoped that I would be able to like advocate for myself, but the doctor just kind of shut me down at this point and was just completely convinced that I didn't have arthritis and that like never had it to begin with and that I was just misdiagnosed. Um, and he essentially suggested that like my pain was all in my head and that I should just read a self-help book to try and help my pain and that it was like I could retrain my brain from feeling pain. But I always kind of felt that there was something like physical happening and it wasn't just like that neuroplastic pain that they talk about. So I continued advocating and we eventually got an MRI of of my spine and it did show that there was damage, which was really validating. It was a confusing process because I was like so desperate for there to be some sort of answers, but then I'm like, why do I want to have have this diagnosis? But it was just like an answer to those questions and that it was like not all in my head and it was really validating. Um, I like ended up crying in my doctor's office so many times trying to be like listened to, which was a frustrating experience with transition. I do would say like my mom was definitely my biggest support. She came with me to like every single appointment and like continued like trying to calm me down if I like would break down. So it was really helpful. She was like the biggest support for me and helping me go to all my appointments and transition and making sure that I like stayed with my doctor and like I didn't drop out or anything, even though it was a challenging time. Eventually, I was able to switch my adult rheumatologist, which I've gone through that process. And thankfully, I have a much better experience now and feeling much more validated as a patient, which I think is like a key point of care. And overall, that I wish I was differently supported as like a patient as a whole, like more holistically, instead of just being treated clinically. I felt like there could have been more approaches as a patient.
I agree, and thanks for sharing that. I was also in a academic hospital actually at first, and then I transitioned, or I was in an academic hospital like at Sick Kids, and then I then went to a community clinic, and then I went to transition into another community clinic. So I have a similar experience of primarily just being in those community clinics, and I don't think there's enough resources that we're given as patients compared to people who have access to those bigger clinics in the hospitals. And on one side, I understand that, it can help us be more independent and look for these resources ourselves, but on the other hand, it's a lot of extra work for patients like us to be like trying to find the right resources without giving given any guidance. And I think it just makes it super tricky for us to navigate. So I'm hoping in the grand scheme of things and in the future they'll be able to provide like similar amounts of resources to wherever you decide to go. Because a big part of it is like not being able to access the big cities and getting there. It's really hard. So I think people should be treated equally or be provided with the equal amount of resources despite where they go. But unfortunately, it's not like that. So I'm hoping that in the future it will be like that. And I think transition just, we always have challenges. And for me, it wasn't really just like, because I know for you, you kind of got a new diagnosis in a way. But for me, it was more so like I didn't know my role in this whole transition process, or I didn't even know what transition was till I joined research, which is like, why do I need to join research to know what it's about? Like, you should be telling me. I feel like I was educated in a different way, or like I learned more about it in a different way, and I think they should be talking about it when you're younger, which is what they do at the bigger hospitals. They just don't really mention it at these smaller clinics, which is very odd, but I mean, I feel like everyone's gonna do it, so why don't you just mention it regardless? So, yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you were going through. It's pretty rough in that sense as well, but yeah, I think things have gotten better, at least for me. Like, now that I'm an adult, I feel like I know what I'm doing. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I definitely have gotten easier navigating those like additional resources and like bringing up things that I feel would be helpful to my doctor instead of like them suggesting everything. So definitely taking like a more active role in my healthcare, kind of like you said, being an adult now. And I think it like especially in those community clinics, we are 18 years old. Like there's a lot of life changes at that same time. So like we always don't always have like that time and energy to like look for those resources. So like you said, it is would be helpful if like doctors kind of had that in mind and were more helpful with that and like making sure their like patients are having like a full like treatment plan and like sticking to it.
For sure. So today we're going to do something different. We usually continue the podcast episode and talk more about your diagnosis journey, but we wanted to change things up from our usual podcast. So we're going to be looking at a short film together, and we both already watched it. So I would recommend anyone who is watching this podcast episode to pause the video, watch it, and then come back. So we'll link it. We'll put it in the description below. So it is titled Fibro and the New Me. And it is a pretty interesting short film. Like, I don't think I would have just found it on the internet like that and gone out of my way to watch something like this. It was definitely something that we did plan and was meaningful. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, how did you feel watching this short film?
Yeah, I think it like definitely brought up like validation feelings and like a little bit of sadness for like these experiences that many of us face like with a chronic illness and fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia kind of after my diagnosis. So I think it like captured like the invisible struggles that many people face with fibromyalgia. So like the daily pain, like the confusion, and just like the emotional toll. I think they did a good job showing. And it just like felt nice to see those like real experiences being portrayed.
Yeah, I agree. When I watched it as well, I felt really sad. I was like, I've been through something like that too, where obviously, like, I live with arthritis, so do you, and we deal with all these different emotions, but just like seeing someone else go through it, I was like, this is really sad. And especially like the amount that she cried and she was breaking down. I was like, that kind of reminded me of me when I was diagnosed initially. I felt like I was like crying a lot. Did you feel that way too?
Yeah, I definitely with a lot of emotions like at that first diagnosis, like it's so confusing, like you being given this label that you've never heard of. So it's like very confusing. So yeah, I definitely felt that validation. Like I definitely cried a lot, like including in like doctor's offices and stuff like that. So it's nice to see that shown as well.
Yeah, for people listening, this film kind of talks about the personal and emotional impact of fibromyalgia, which is a chronic condition, and a lot of it, and Maggie, you can discuss kind of the symptoms, but it talks about like pain, fatigue, some cognitive difficulties, and this film kind of shows, the challenges that are faced by people living with invisible illnesses and really showing kind of strength and resilience and how to navigate that daily life. So when you were watching it, did you find it relatable?
Yeah, I definitely felt like the symptoms that she was showing and described were definitely relatable, like the pins and needles up and down the body. I felt that, like debilitating fatigue, and like that caught like brain fog is usually how they like describe it with fibromyalgia and other. So just like kind of feeling like your body is just shutting down with like fatigue and like your brain is just jello and not working properly. Um, I think it also did a good job showing like those struggles with like explaining your symptoms to friends and family and even doctors. And so, yeah, I think it showed a good portion of that and like relatableness of like those struggles that people go through.
Yeah, especially I think just going to the doctor and then breaking down, which is what you mentioned, like that is also something that happens, and then just, wanting to get out of there as soon as possible and kind of being in denial that you are experiencing this. I think for me, like I was probably in a little bit of denial, or I just didn't know how to navigate my life with this disease. So I was pretty upset too. So it was pretty relatable in that sense. I don't have fibromyalgia, but I know people in our organization and in the community that do, and it is pretty hard because there's no actual like treatment for it. And then it's like, okay, you're dealing with pain, fatigue, all these symptoms, but then what do you actually do about it?
Yeah, it's definitely hard for that part. I definitely found like when they were talking, the doctor like immediately mentioning fibromyalgia. I think that was a little like an idealized scenario. Like she mentioned her symptoms, and the doctor was immediately like, "Oh, I think you have fibromyalgia." From my personal experience, I think it's more of like a like exclusion diagnosis. So they like just trying to exclude all of these like other things. And then from my experience, it was more just like, oh, we don't really know what's wrong with you. So here's this like label of fibromyalgia. And then from that, I have been on like medications that they are not like specifically for fibromyalgia. They're more like mental health medication or like antidepressants that have like had research that have shown they're helpful for fibromyalgia. So I'm like on um, Cymbalta right now for that and have found it like relatively helpful for those fibromyalgia pains and stuff like that.
That's really
But
good to hear. I was gonna say that I also think that it's not realistic in my perspective, just because I've talked to so many people with fibromyalgia, and you're right, it's like the exclusion. Doctors rule out everything else, and then they're like, okay, well, this is the label, and you're so right about that. People are often, it's the last thing you think about because you want to try to find something else in order to provide treatment options that are more reasonable and realistic to provide that like pain relief. And then a lot of the times when people get fibromyalgia, they're like, I don't know what to do with this diagnosis because I don't know how to help myself with it. And it's more so, like management aspects of it, which makes it really hard because managing is really helpful. Personally, I think like you can be on treatment and the treatment can take a really long time to work, but being able to learn how to manage your pain is really important. But then also not having treatment at all, I'm just like, I can manage my pain, but then I feel like I'm still going to be in some sort of pain because it's like kind of both of the things working together. So, how do you manage your pain?
Yeah, I think as you said, it's definitely like a really big combination between the two. Um, so I use like my medications for like that long term kind of thing. And then I've definitely had to learn to become more like proactive, I guess, with my pain management. Because I think I always had this idea like, oh, I don't want to use up my like pain management tools until it gets like too bad. And then you're like kind of desperate and like scrambling to figure things out. So I think being more proactive and like physio has been helpful and like strengthening certain areas have been helpful. And I've like had pain, like massage and acupuncture and things like that, chiropractic. Um, Treatments and stuff have found that helpful. So more so like a combination with like the treatment from my doctor and then having to go outside of the clinic to like reach my own resources and kind of have my own like pain management toolkit that I've had to build and like having my I find ice more helpful. Some people find heat more helpful and like keeping braces and just like pain management tools and like pain relief cream constantly. So yeah, I always smell like menthol because I have pain relief cream on me. It's fun. But yeah.
Yeah, I find it super helpful. I've been in a lot of pain, and my rheumatologist is like, you just need to use whatever works for you, and that's fine as long as it's not interacting with any sort of medications, it's okay, and it happens to not be, so that's fine. So I wanted to ask you because there was this another character in this short film, like it was the girl, but then there was also her boyfriend, and so what did you think about his role in terms of supporting her?
Yeah, I think they did a good job like showing it because I think he was definitely trying, and I think it shows like that experience a lot of people have when first explaining it to partners or family and stuff. Like, especially having a diagnosis that you don't really understand and then trying to explain it to others. I don't think he fully understood what she was going through and like how he could help. But I appreciate that the film like showed him trying to like care for her and that like they showed him taking some time to himself and like collecting his emotions and like how he felt about it without like putting that on her and then going back to her and kind of seeing how he could help and stuff. And I think that shows like how important communication is with like these your friends and family and like how it can take time to like explain these things and like people need time to adapt to like a new thing and changes are different. So I think they did a good job showing that. And I think he was definitely trying and doing the things that he could to help her.
I think also his reaction was really common because I know at first he kind of lashed out a bit and he like went away, walked away, and then came back later. And, he was upset and he was kind of like saying, like, don't blame me, it's like not my fault and all these things. But I think the biggest thing that was really good to see is the fact that he changed his kind of mindset and his like behavior. And then he was like all the way there 100% to support her all the time afterwards, which was really nice. Unfortunately, the reality is that people do not really know how to handle navigating those situations. And the really like interesting part was when she said, like, are you gonna leave me? Like, don't leave me because of this diagnosis. And I think a lot of people with chronic illness or pain feel like people are gonna like stop being friends with them or stop being in a relationship with them because they live with this disease. And he was really nice to be like, it doesn't matter what you live with, like, I'm still gonna be here. But I think a big fear is we think that people are gonna leave. And in reality, it's pretty rare. I know people that have had those experiences where there are people like that. Not saying that everyone's perfect and everyone's gonna be like, yes, we will help you out. But in most cases, when you do open up, majority of people are pretty accepting in the sense that they're not going to leave you if you were already friends with them. But it was just so interesting because I felt like that part was really relatable in a sense that I always have that fear of, is this person going to stop talking to me? Things like that. And then the fact that he reacted in that way of, don't blame me, don't come at me. It is a possibility that that might happen to us in the future, like thinking about partners and like people can react that way. So it really showed the reality of things, but it showed a really nice aspect of him, like wanting to research, like he mentioned, researching the condition and like wanting to learn. And I think a lot of people should be doing that, regardless if you are impacted with if you know someone living with rheumatic disease, like you should be researching all these different topics in general and being knowledgeable in case something happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important and like to show those reactions because like a lot of people might think that like, oh, this is their reaction, they aren't going to support me. But I think again, that's like a component that people do need to like digest things and like they if it is a big change and they like are a big part of their your life and they want to help, like it will take him some time. So I think that was good that they showed that.
At the end, they mentioned providing resources and support groups and kind of like a community. And at least for me, I don't think my doctors in the past have ever asked me about those questions. Like, do you need a community? Do you need to join the support group? Like, I've never been asked those questions. I've had to go out of my way to ask and still not get the resources. And that's why I created my own thing. But, like, I never got asked, hey, do you want to join this support group for your arthritis? Like, never ever did any of my doctors ask me that. And it was interesting because it was so quick that in that room she asked the patient, or even recommended, you should be joining support groups and all that. And I was like, you didn't, no one asked me that. Yeah, so for you, did your doctors ask you that?
Yeah, I think like you had not specifically like support groups or anything like that from my doctor. Like I've had the Arthritis Society recommend their like support groups and stuff when I go see them. But yeah, I don't think my doctors have ever like my pediatric rheumatologist was the one that introduced me to like the arthritis camps and referred me to that. So I think that was like part of me finding my like arthritis community, but it wasn't really like a support group kind of thing. It was more like meeting other kids that have arthritis in like a fun environment for arthritis camp.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about arthritis camp from lots of different people, and there are lots of good resources, but I just find that, there's not enough awareness about them. Like, you really need to go out of your way to go find them, and either they don't give all the resources available or they only give like one or two. And I think it's nice to have options and preferences to see like what works best for you. So I'm glad that in that video they were really just open to saying, you should join this and that could help you. And just like looking back at this whole film in general, do you think that this would have been helpful or you would have benefited from seeing something like this when you were initially diagnosed in any way?
Yeah, I think definitely like it would have helped being like feeling less alone and knowing that like other people have gone through these similar experiences. Like we were talking about like the going to the doctor's office, like crying in the doctor's office, like having frustrating conversations with friends and family. And I think it was like really validating to see those experiences. And I think it would have been helpful, especially being diagnosed at like a young age with like an illness that I've never heard of. So like validating to see similar experiences, similar diagnosis, and like kind of seeing like a nice interaction of like how she should be treated, I guess. And like not everyone has that like idealized situation. So it was, I guess, nice to see that like some people do have good experiences and there are like doctors out there that do want to help and like more like offering resources and like options, like we said, and stuff like that. So I think it would definitely have been helpful to see something like that.
Yeah, I think also maybe seeing the bad parts of it, and we saw some of that in this film, but the interactions with doctors, which are not great, are also important to highlight too. So I think for me, it would have been helpful too, just seeing, maybe even someone younger. I think that would have been better. Like seeing someone younger, my age, 13 years old, getting diagnosed would be helpful as well. And then knowing that, you can talk to some of these people too would have been helpful as well. But there are lots of things that I think going back and looking back now, I'm like, I wish I had this and this and this, but I'm just hoping that we'd be able to hopefully change that for the future generation of patients living with rheumatic diseases and prevent some of those things that we experience so they don't have to experience that. Thank you so much, Maggie, for joining me on this week's episode. We took a different turn today to look at a short film called Fibro and the New Me. Everyone make sure to like, comment, subscribe, check out Maggie's social media channels that I will link below, as well as the short film. And I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.